Hello, and welcome to our Economic and Workforce Development webinar. Joining us today is Randall Kempner, Aspen Institute. We're going to give everyone a minute to join. As we wait for others to log on, yes, please do use the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. Hello, Charles from Portland, Maine. Nice of you to join us. We'll get started here in just a minute or two as we wait for others to enter the room. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. We're going to give it just one more minute as we wait for others to join the room before we get started. While we wait, you will note there is a poll available for your participation now. We'd appreciate it if you navigate to that section. You'll find it on the right-hand side. You'll see polls. Should be a little alert icon there as well. You can participate in that question to help inform our speakers' content. All right. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Andrew Sporer. I am the Director of Marketing and Communication here at Chmura Economics and Analytics, and I'm excited to introduce Chmura's CEO and Chief Economist, Dr. Chris Chmura, and climate smart finance thought leader, Randall Kempner, Senior Advisor at the Aspen Institute's Energy and Environment Program. Today, we've teamed up to discuss economic and workforce development opportunities presented by recent trends in green energy and climate resiliency. But before we get started, I'd like to cover just a few housekeeping items and answer a few of your questions as I see them coming through in the chat, as well as giving you a brief overview of our organization if you're not already familiar. As a reminder, yes, the presentation will be recorded. We will send a notification to all registrants with a link to watch the recording as well as access the slides. In addition, you can view all our webinars on our website at chmura.com/resources, and you will see all previous webinars there. Questions. I see many of you have familiarized yourself with the chat function. Excellent. We're here today to examine economic and workforce development opportunities to help you drive growth in your communities. We want this to be as much of a value add to your line of work as possible. So if you've got specific questions on legislation, occupations, industry growth, or anything else, please do utilize the chat box. You'll also see a poll function immediately beneath the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. We've already added a poll there for you to participate in as well. By doing so, you'll help inform the content that we share with you today, and will help contextualize some of our speakers' material. So thank you in advance for participating there. Before we dig in, I'd like to introduce just a little bit more about us. We provide labor market data and analysis through three main offerings: our JobsEQ software, consulting services, and access to data. We were founded in 1998 by our CEO, Chris Chmura. We're celebrating our 25th year anniversary. Congratulations, Chris, and everyone who made that milestone possible. Today, we are broadcasting from our office in Richmond, Virginia, but we also have an office in Cleveland, Ohio. As a team, we care about helping our customers grow their businesses and their communities. We like to say that we share in our customers' success. So our goal is truly your satisfaction and your growth. And lastly, we're driven by excellence in our customer service and in our data quality. Really, I think that's what differentiates us most as a company. In our customer support, if you're familiar with JobsEQ, we've got an average response time of under a minute where we can connect you with a real economist. Excellence is our top priority, and it informs absolutely everything we do. With that, it's translated to an over 90% annual renewal rate for our software. Pretty incredible in the B2B SaaS space. I think that's testament to the ongoing partnership and communication we maintain with all of our users. So if you are an active customer, thank you for your feedback. We could not continue to do this without you. Speaking of our customers, the labor market data, the software, the consulting services we offer, it can benefit a wide range of industries. For corporate clients who need competitive analysis and benchmarking, for our partners in economic development seeking insights on labor availability of their region, for higher ed institutions who need labor market data to make academic planning decisions, for those in site selection who need to compare wages and average commute time between locations, for staffing agencies and talent acquisition professionals who are looking for potential customers, wage insights, and information on who's hiring and for what roles, or for those in workforce development, which we'll talk a lot about today, who want to track real-time changes in their economy and identify which occupations and skills provide the most opportunity for their labor force. Here's just a quick snapshot of some of our customers. In addition to the powerful labor market software we provide, we also offer customized economic consulting services. And I recommend you get a taste of those with our weekly economic update. It is absolutely free. Each Sunday, our consulting team, led by blue chip and PhD economists, will deliver economic headlines and key takeaways straight to your inbox. Definitely a good way to keep on top of the news and stay ahead of trends. But we're not here to talk about that today. I would like to pass this over to Senior Advisor of the Energy and Environment Program, Randall Kempner, coming from Houston, is it?
Austin, but you know,
Austin,
156 miles away.
I'm sorry, Randall.
Oh, Andrew, it's great to be here. Thank you for making this happen. I also wanted to thank you, Chris and Mike, for the opportunity to present with you today. And thank you to I love how good it's 111 of you who decided to spend some of your morning or afternoon with us. I'm going to be relatively brief in my remarks, but start by just saying that the Aspen Institute is a global nonprofit organization. We are committed to realizing a free, just, and equitable society. And we do this by driving change through dialogue, leadership, and action, focused really on the most important issues facing the U.S. and the world. I work presently for the Energy Environment Program, which is one of about 25 policy programs at the Institute, actually one of the oldest. And while the mission of the Energy Environment Program has changed a bit over the years, we are presently squarely focused on how to get people, organizations, and governments to take greater action on climate change. And so in this context, we think that how climate will impact the practice of economic and workforce development is really critical. And I certainly believe, coming from an economic development background, that the issues related to climate should be in most serious economic development conversations and in all of your strategies. However, I suspect that that is not actually the case today, but we're going to use this poll to find out. So as Andrew mentioned, if you haven't already, if you go to the right-hand side of your screen, you can hit the polls button. And I have two questions. This first one is looking at this question of assessing the level of consideration given to climate impacts in your current regional organizational economic development strategy. So I'll take 20 more seconds here for people hopefully to find that and to take the poll for this first question. All right, I see it moving back and forth a little bit. So maybe like 10 more seconds. Okay. I'm just going to write down what I'm seeing and then, okay. Okay, so this is poll question number one, and I'm gonna compare it to previous version that I did at the International Economic Development Council conference in February. But for now, can we move to the next question, Andrew? Yeah, here I am. Here's the question. He's going to load it, but so you can think about it, is how would you rank the present quality of climate-smart economic development learning resources, broadly speaking? So those are guides, training sessions, conferences, reports, things that you might look to if you wanted to learn more about how to incorporate climate issues and considerations into your economic development strategies. And I know that Andrew is quickly putting it up so we can take that. All right, there we go. It's live. Do this in the next 30 seconds or so if possible. All right, 10 more seconds. Awesome. Thank you for participating. And I can share with you that your results are pretty similar to what we did when this poll was given to the participants at the IEDC February winter conference. Asked the same questions. If you look at the first one about incorporation of climate issues, actually they seemingly were a little less engaged than this group has been. Well over 60%, around 63% either did not incorporate it at all or only did so a little bit. And only 23 incorporated it in a significant way. The poll results that I wrote down from this group was that only about 13% of you have incorporated climate issues in a significant way or like a really comprehensive way, a little bit higher on the significance. So there were 30% that were significant, but only 13% that were kind of fully incorporating climate. And then on the availability question, both groups pretty much recognize that what's out there is either a fair or poor quality in terms of its availability, not necessarily quality, but there's just not a lot. And so that is consistent with what I have suspected and what I've felt and what I've asked other audiences, that there are really 2 points here. There really is just not enough incorporation of climate perspectives into economic development strategies. And there are not enough tools out there to help those that want to incorporate climate considerations. On this first point, I truly, personally believe that climate is the next equity. It is a lens that all economic developers will need to apply in order to do our jobs well. And I agree and believe that there are not nearly enough tools or trainings or conferences, events, fellowships, certifications, all the stuff that we would want to help economic and workforce development professionals to learn. Fortunately, there are a few good resources, and I wanted to share one of those today, which comes from the International Economic Development Council. They came out with a report in 2022 called Economic Development and Changing Climate. And so I want to hit a few highlights of that report as an introduction to the session and to our conversation today. So at a high level, the report makes the case that climate change represents a significant threat to the economic platforms of many communities, and that there are significant economic development opportunities associated with the ongoing transition to a low carbon economy. So if we look first at the risks, it's just kind of obvious, right? It's hard to do business if you are underwater, burned up, frozen, or in 100-degree heat without air conditioning, which is something I experienced last year. And extreme weather that causes these types of challenges is on the rise. And I'll come to that more in a second. In terms of some of the economic transition risks, we are in the midst of a major economic transformation, like it or not. And certain industries and job categories are at risk. I think it is safe to say that the future is not bright for the coal industry in the United States, nor is it for gas stations unless they also put in EV charging. And then thirdly, there are workforce risks. Big question, will you be able as a community, as a region, to retain and attract workers due to weather? It's always been a factor. Weather does matter. People make choices based on that. But it's going to be even more and more important. And then critically, do your workers have the skill sets necessary to thrive in a transformed economy? And if not, how are you going to help? How are we going to help them get to them? So diving a little bit deeper into this weather thing, our friends at NOAA, the U.S. Department of Commerce Weather Agency, do a report every year that assesses the number and the impact of billion-dollar disasters. So they count all of the disasters across the country that have $1 billion of economic impact or more. And so this slide shows where they all were and what they all were in 2023. But before we dive into last year, let's talk about the last 40 years. The story is not a pretty one. In the decade of the 80s, there were $3.3 billion disasters a year. And then in the 2000s, it went up to 6.7 per year. The average over the last 5 years was $20.3 billion events per year. And last year, we had the most ever, $28 billion disasters in the United States. And for you economists in the room, and I know there are quite a few of you, this is all in real inflation-adjusted terms. So last year, it cost about $100 billion in damage. And again, this doesn't include lives lost, the emotional stress, and all of the things which we cannot calculate. And it doesn't include all the events that just had $999 million in damage. So this is not a full set of the impacts. As a Texan, I like to point out that we are number one in this particular category. We like to be number one. Probably not a good one to be number one in, however. 16 of the $28 billion disasters in 2023 hit Texas. We had about $20 billion in damage. And here in Austin, where I live, we had 45 consecutive days of 100-degree highs, destroying the previous record of 27 that was set in 2011. And climate scientists are confident that this only happened because of the changes that we're seeing. So that's the bad side. That's the scary part. But there are opportunities that are associated with any economic transformation. The report highlights 5 of them, and I'll let you just see them on the screen, and I'll land on the one with the star. But to simplify, globally, the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate found that the transition to a low-carbon economy could unlock $26 trillion in economic benefits annually by 2050. Excuse me, not annually, that's total by 2050. Some of that is in reduced health costs and the reduction of pollution, but a lot of that economic benefit and opportunity is in green industries, with investors and startups and big corporations flocking to the low carbon space in industries like electric vehicles and clean hydrogen and solar and wind generation and the mining of critical minerals. There is a massive amount of job creation that is happening. We'll learn more about this and more to come, because to build out the low carbon infrastructure that we need, the transmission lines, the charging stations, and the heat pumps and the installation of those heat pumps, we're going to need an army of construction workers for all this to happen. And critically, new industries and opportunities for places that were not recently thriving are going to be created. So frankly, all of a sudden, being rural and flat and windy is a major opportunity. This is an amazing opportunity for the middle of our country in particular, and we are seeing wind and solar installations expanding throughout the heartland. And then the stars are here because the United States government is clearly getting behind this. As we will learn, over the last 2 years, there have been a variety of different legislative actions, including the Inflation Reduction Act, that have created at least $500 billion in climate-related economic development incentives. And Mike's going to share more about those. So there are a variety of roles that economic development and, in fact, workforce organizations could play in this transition. You can see them on the screen, but let me just simplify again and sort of ask this question of what can you do and where should you start? Well, it's pretty simple. I believe that all economic and workforce development professionals need to thoughtfully and consistently ask the question, how will the changing climate impact my regional economic and workforce development strategies? You gotta at least ask the question. And the harder part, but the critical part, is then acting on the answer. So with that, thanks for my portion of this. I'm going to obviously stick around for questions and answers at the end. The report that I mentioned, you can get at this link, and I know that we'll be sharing that after the presentations today. So again, on my behalf, thanks for being here, and Mike, take it away.
All righty. Well, thank you very much, Randall, for your insight on this topic and for the nice introduction into why this is such a crucial topic for economic developers and communities today. So we're now going to pivot to talk a bit about what your communities and economic development organizations should be aware of and do regarding attracting green industries and related jobs. But first, as a quick introduction, my name is Mike Chmura. I'm an economist, and I'll start us off on our end before handing it over to our CEO and Chief Economist, Dr. Chris Chmura, later in this presentation. So staying here at the moment, Randall set us up very nicely on why economic developers and communities should care about green investments. But let's dive deeper on some of the tangible impacts here for communities. And it really comes in one of two distinct ways. One is through the investment and incentives, which Randall touched upon. And then the second one is through job creation. So let's first dive into some of the available resources to help with investment. And one of the largest and most notable of these is the Inflation Reduction Act, also known as the IRA. It was passed in the summer of 2022 and made an active statute to begin 2023. So we're over a year since it's been in place. I'm sure many of you know the basics and may have even perhaps started to see some of this funding impacting your own regions. But just as a quick overview, they have allocated just under $400 billion to different climate investments, according to a study done by McKinsey. Now, this is just one program. So as I'll go into, there's also investment from the BIL, CHIPS, and others. But this includes business incentives and tax credits, such as for clean hydrogen and clean electricity, and then also consumer incentives, such as for energy efficient appliances and rooftop solar panels. So who is getting this money right now? So looking at the right-hand side, at least for grant and loan funding, you see that this has already started to be awarded. Of course, you see larger states like California and Texas topping the list, with Arizona, another high solar producing state, also up there. But it's not just the large states receiving these grants. When looking at the per capita adjusted amounts, you see a very different set of states like Alaska and Idaho, et cetera there. So certainly a good spread of funds going around from these federal dollars. So I'm sure regions are interested to see how much funding is still out there for grabs, especially if you're not seeing this impact on your region yet. Well, overall, there's still a lot of potential. Again, we're only a year into this process. On the figure on the left-hand side, we see the breakdown of IRA funding by fund type. You see nearly $260 billion estimated going towards business and consumer tax incentives, and then another $122 billion in grants and loans. Now, the tax credits are huge here, but not always super visible. But these are ongoing until the end of tax year 2032, and they're uncapped. But so this is just an estimate of how much money is going towards this. It could be more. But again, we're only a year into this, so companies have only started being able to claim some of these. But even in the grant and loan portion, only $23 billion has been publicly awarded so far, as seen in that far right column. So there's still a lot of opportunities out there. And just as a side note, this $23 billion is the funds awarded. It's uncertain how much of this funding has been distributed yet. But this also shows the IRA. So the infrastructure law is still a bit further along with funding than the IRA is at this point. So you see some of these opportunities for grants and loans which have not closed yet. Some like numbers 1 and 2 on this right-hand side are active into 2031, while some others like the Solar for All program close with applications later this year. But again, the tax incentives are active throughout 2032, and that will drive a lot of private investment, even absent direct grants. And again, these direct grants are not, some are going to private investment, but also for climate resiliency efforts and things of the like. So that's the investment side of things. But another core goal for economic development is jobs creation and growth. And this is something we've been seeing some very interesting recent trends in. So these two figures show year-over-year growth nationwide for green jobs in 2 subsectors: green energy, which is your wind, solar, hydro, etc., generation and support, and then also battery manufacturing. Both are currently seeing above the national average year-over-year job growth, clean energy by 1.7 percentage points and battery manufacturing by 4 percentage points. And interestingly, especially with the green energy subsector, you see that acceleration in 2022 when the IRA was signed, leading to this year where green energy is for the first time, except for 2020 during COVID, where green energy job growth has outpaced the national average. So there's clearly some positive momentum brewing here, which some regions are taking advantage of. But what regions are benefiting the most from this job growth? First of all, just a disclaimer that the graphs on the right here are for the green energy sub-industry only, so only a minor part of the larger green economy, which includes, by our estimates, up to 40 million jobs nationwide. I'll talk more about this top line number in just a few slides. But digging down to this level with top states and MSAs for clean energy job growth in 2023, we're seeing a lot of New England and Southwestern cities and states on the top 10s on these lists. But if you want more information on these trends, we recently published a piece all about this on our website. I'll drop the link in the chat now for anyone interested. We also explore what's causing this trend, and we do have significant reasons to believe that the IRA and other federal investments are driving factors. So I'll drop that in the chat now for anyone interested in learning more. Okay, so now that we've set the stakes, I'm sure you want to know what economic developers and community leaders can do to capitalize on this growing green economy. Well, specifically, we're going to dive into 3 aspects that economic developers should consider, starting with the bedrock of good data and KPI tracking down to tactical considerations regarding housing and supply chain. Dr. Chris Chmura will talk more about these in just a bit, but first I wanted to quickly highlight some data pieces before we continue. Okay, so specifically a big question that we get all the time is how can I classify and track green jobs? Government data isn't always the most clean cut, especially for new and innovative industries like green jobs. And there's always a lot of non-disclosures as you dig down into specific geographies. Our software Jobs EQ, which I'm sure we have several Jobs EQ users on the call today, simplifies this process. So specifically, it gives you the ability to analyze historical trends, employment forecasts, job postings, and even skills and resumes for green jobs and those working in the green industry. But let's dive into the main difficulty here about what actually counts as a green job. And again, as I said, there's no clean classification of green jobs in government data sets. The Occupational Information Network, or ONET, has a method to estimate this by occupation, while BLS has produced a report in the past to estimate green jobs by industry. So the question for many people is, what is this difference? Here we have some information on how Jobs EQ treats this subject. So for occupations, Jobs EQ does use this ONET occupation methodology and measures green jobs in one of three ways. It's included as a green job if it is considered a green increased demand occupation. This is when the green economy caused an increase in the demand for an existing occupation, but did not change the existing tasks or duty of the occupation. So a good example of this would be some bus drivers, perhaps, which due to increases in public transportation can be considered a fringe green job. Green enhanced skills occupations. These are occupations where the green economy has spurred a significant change in the tasks, skills, or credentials of the existing occupation. A good example of this that we see a lot is electrical engineers. And then lastly, we have green new and emerging occupations. And this is what most people think of when considering green jobs. These are the cases in which an entirely new SOC code was created to capture new green work or tasks. A good example of this could be wind turbine technicians, for example. So the green jobs classification by occupation is very useful in order to get a holistic estimate of these green jobs in your area. Jobs EQ even allows you to specify for entry-level only green jobs needing a high school diploma or less. However, this is just an estimate and includes a specific set of assumptions that, when updated, may skew historical results. Therefore, it's not always the best to use this occupational grouping method to analyze job growth trends over time. But for that, you're not out of luck. You just want to use a targeted industry subgroup. And some relatively straightforward examples are clean energy and battery manufacturing, which we mentioned previously. But you could even make some custom groups such as green industries and construction. We reported some of these data in the slides I just went over a couple minutes ago, but this industry method is great for tracking trends and analyzing specific events. But using this method is a bit hard to get a quote unquote full picture of green jobs. So, a couple different methods here based on what goal you're trying to get out of this data. So I know that was a lot of information. Government data sometimes makes it harder for these things than we'd like, but Jobs EQ tries to make this as simple as possible. But now, Chris, I'll turn it to you to run us through some examples of what considerations that economic developers should be aware of.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to go back to that slide that Mike had on previously. Let me go back a couple of slides. Well, that's okay. We don't have to. I'll just talk you guys through it. So here actually is it the major elements for economic developers to consider. And again, I'm going to speak more specifically, give you some examples of what you've already been given by Mike. And Randall did a great job, made the comment, how will the change in climate impact my regional and economic workforce strategies? So here are three ways. One, it's going to change your current baseline of employment, what's growing, what's not. The supply chain is going to change. You need to foster suppliers that help for example, the battery manufacturers. Who can you bring into your region and give an advantage both to your region and to the battery manufacturing? Then housing has increasingly become an important consideration as we're bringing in new large facilities. First of all, do you have the workers? Then the next question becomes, do you have the houses for those workers to live in? So now here, Mike talked about the energy cluster. So we've created this in Jobs EQ. And for those of you who don't use Jobs EQ, here what we're pulling for you by industry, and let me go all the way to the bottom. So all the way to the bottom, the last row shows you all industries in the U.S. The one above it shows only the green industries in the energy cluster as we've defined it with the industries above it. But so you see there's about 161,000 people working in these green industries, and that's a little less than 1% of all people working in the U.S. Go to the right of that and notice that in the green energies, the average green industries in the energy cluster, the average wage is 120,000, much better than the 69,861 average for all industries in the U.S. The location quotient is 1 for all of these because we're comparing the percentage in the U.S. to the percentage in the U.S. So by definition, that's a 1. But this becomes, the LQ becomes important when we look at regions. I'm looking at an employment change over the last 5 years. And so you see the number 6.8 million jobs added in the U.S. above it, 18,700 added in the green energy cluster. And then the spark chart to the right shows you, yes, in the last couple of years, that trend has gone up. And then go all the way to the left. The last column shows you in all industries in the U.S., employment is expected to grow 0.3% on average a year for the next 10 years. In the green energy cluster, it's expected to grow much faster, 1.8%. To the left of that, 2,800 jobs added in green energy because of growth in those industries, but another 8,784 jobs needed to be filled because people are leaving those industries, going to others. And then to the left of that, 5,700 more people needed to be added because typically they're retiring, they're exiting that industry. So in total, every year for the next 10 years, on average, we'll need to see 17,349 jobs in the green energy cluster. Over a 10-year period, that equals 173,000. And as I was thinking of this yesterday, actually, it made me think, remember Amazon HQ2 when they advertised we're going to put 50,000 jobs somewhere? It actually ended up being 25,000 jobs. But Amazon received 238 proposals from different areas around the country to try to win those 50,000 jobs in their region. Here we're talking about 173,000 jobs over a 10-year period. So certainly this is something that economic developers ought to be looking to help their region. I've highlighted at the top battery manufacturing and nuclear electric power generation because they are the two largest employers. You can see in that first column of numbers, 51,000 and 41,000. And by the way, it's interesting, nuclear electric power is the only carbon neutral energy generator. Although windmills and solar are considered green, they're not net carbon neutral. But you do see for nuclear electric power generation, a slight decline expected on average over the next 10 years. I wouldn't be surprised if that changes with some of the newer, smaller nuclear power plants coming out. But at the top, battery manufacturing, largest number of jobs now, expected to grow at the fastest pace. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at that in just a minute here. But first, let's look at just all of the green energy cluster jobs around the U.S. before we drill down into battery. And here we're looking at the location quotient. So again, if it's greater than 1, then there's a greater concentration in this county than in the U.S. The darker the color, the higher the location quotient. So you can see here in the key, some little counties have over 500 in terms of the location quotient. Anything greater than 1.25 is considered a competitive advantage. So these darker blue areas have great advantages in terms of the energy cluster and the jobs in those areas. Here on this slide now, I'm looking at just in the map here, I'm looking at just the battery manufacturing, the location quotients. And again, the darker blue are showing you where there's a high location quotient. And you can see some areas in the Midwest, in some in the West, some in the East, some in the South. Often those counties are within close proximity to vehicle assembly, and in particular, electronic vehicle assembly. So the county with the highest location quotient, I wonder if we have anyone on this that's near Story County, Nevada. 1,921 is the location quotient. They have a huge competitive advantage. That county has a population of 4,095 people. Within the industry makeup of that county, 70% is manufacturing. Within the manufacturing, 86% of the manufacturing is battery manufacturing. There's a plant there that's owned by Tesla, making lithium-ion batteries built between 2014 and 2017. And based on an area development article in March of 23, they are expected to put 3.6 more billion in to establish 2 gigafactories to add 3,000 more jobs. And as a result of this, the mayor was saying that as a result of its first abatement agreement in 2014, Tesla will begin paying an annual minimum of $53 million in real and personal property taxes and modified business taxes related to the Gigafactory commencing July 1st, 2024. So that's coming up, and in perpetuity thereafter. So I'm sure there's some economic developers and officials in this room, and even educators, that would really like to see that kind of benefit coming to their region. And so Story is east of Reno, just to give you an approximate idea of where they're located. So the next question becomes, all right, we've got these large battery plants coming to regions. What kind of skills do they need in terms of the workers? So here, again, we're looking at all the battery plants across the U.S. The one occupation that they employ the most of is this electrical, electronic, and electromechanical equipment assemblers. And so you can see there in 2023, they had 10,000 people employed with an average wage of 41,000. And you can see the annual demand is 1,538. So you're probably thinking, well, that's not too hard to get 1,538 people to move into the region. However, that only takes into account what's needed at battery manufacturing plants. If we look at all plants or all industries in the U.S., then the demand for those electrical, electromechanical equipment makers is 31,000. So here, batteries are looking for the battery manufacturing plants are looking for 1,500 people out of that 31,000. So there is a lot of competition for these occupations across different industries in the U.S. So the bottom line here is it's very important that workforce work with educators to make sure you're getting the skills needed. You know, whether that's higher education, for example, number 5, industrial engineers, or community college. More of these occupations would be in that category. The machinist in item number, or the career occupation number 8, or even career and technical education. It's important that education and economic development are working together. And also, this gives you an idea of why a lot of federal funding, Mike touched on this a bit, is available to train the workforce. We have the plants that are coming in now. We don't necessarily have the workforce in those regions, and so the federal government is providing training for that to happen. So now in terms of the number of workers, on the last map I was showing you the location quotient. Here we're looking at the number of workers in different counties in terms of battery manufacturing. And you could see again that these are generally located around vehicle manufacturing, especially electronic vehicles. And this particular employment in this industry grew fairly fast over the last 5 years, 6% on average, compared to just 0.9% for all industries. So again, it's an area where we're seeing some very good growth. And there you see Story County is at the top with 11,000. But what I'm going to do now to talk about supply chain, I'm going to switch over. If you go all the way to the West Coast, look at that county that is the biggest county in terms of mileage in the U.S., San Bernardino, and we're going to look at the Riverside, San Bernardino, Ontario, California MSA to look at gaps in the supply chain. So we bring in these battery plants, and now these battery plants need suppliers. So another thing as economic developers or even workforce or education we need to look at, so what suppliers may come in, and so how do we train people for that? So to orient you on this, so the first column under supply industries are showing you what supplies are needed for these battery manufacturing plants. So the very first thing needed is non-ferrous metal, and then below it, iron and steel mills. And then you go on down and see what other supplies these battery plants buy in order to make the batteries. And then we have the next column within this MSA in San Bernardino. How much do those firms purchase from the US? How much of that purchasing is in the region? 2.1 million, just going with the top line for non-ferrous metal. The purchases that come from outside the region, so there's not enough producers in the MSA, so these battery plants are purchasing almost $900,000 worth of supplies outside the region. How many people they employ, location quotient, and so the percentage, last column, yellow, green, and red, the percentage purchased in the region. So if it's red, for example, if it's green, then all of the supplies are theoretically being purchased in the region. If it's red, not so much. So what I'd like you to center in now, and sorry, this column, this box is off, but it's represents this 24%. So only 24% of the non-ferrous metal is being purchased in San Bernardino MSA to the tune of $1 million. So from an economic development perspective, what firms can I, as an economic developer, attract into the San Bernardino MSA and show them that they'll have a prospective purchaser in the county? So it's a win for you, you bring in more jobs, and it's a win for the battery plant because they have a supplier that's nearby. So now, one other thing that has become increasingly important over the last year, especially, has been housing. And so we've had our examples where you're building a plant with 2,000 people that are going to work there in a rural area. The plant is almost made. The executives come down and they look and they say, where are the people going to live that work at this plant? So we've worked with some housing groups in Virginia. In fact, we did a study that just ended in November for the administration here in Virginia about the importance of housing in economic development and the importance of putting it in a strategic plan. Interviewed over 70 people, and all of them except one said, yes, it's very important. And we can get you, in fact, thank you, Patrick, just gave us a link if you're interested in seeing that. So now if you have Jobs EQ, you know the what if is a really neat analytic that a lot of economic developers use. What if a battery manufacturing plant comes to San Bernardino, so we're looking at the computer screen now, with 900 workers, then they're going to need 177 electrical, electronic, electromechanical equipment assemblers. There's 177 in the region. I'm sorry, they're going to need 177. Currently, there are 3,459 employed in the region, 192 unemployed. Going to the last column, what economic developers, site selectors, expanding firms have said to us, we like to see 50 employed or unemployed people in each occupation for every one that we're trying to employ. So if that potential candidate per opening is green, that means, yes, we should be able to find the workers. I'll be happy. If it's orange, we may not be able to find the workers. We may have to bring them in from outside the region. So then that means we'll need to have housing for them if we're bringing them in from outside the region. So here now we're looking at some of those occupations that are short the number of people that they need. And I want to center on the second one, which is the multiple machine tool setter. We're going to need 22. We have 804 in the region, 4 unemployed. And then if you look at the colorful column, that's 37. The ratio is not 50, so we don't have enough people. It's implied that we're going to have to bring people from outside the region, which suggests they're going to need housing. So you look at the next column, and based on the occupation wages of that particular occupation, we've determined that they could afford a rental budget of $1,120, or they could afford a budget of $179,000. And then our next step from there is to take a look at, okay, for this one occupation that we looked at, how many more new accommodations are going to be needed? So on that previous one, there were 22 new employer demand. We had 4 people unemployed. So we subtracted 22 minus 4. And the assumption is we're going to need 18 new housing units, whether they be a house or an apartment, based on demographic data. And we looked at this by zip code. 53% of those new units would be rentals, and the average monthly price point would be between $1,000 and $1,499 in terms of mortgage or apartments. And then in this case, if you're interested in talking to us about this, we can give you more information on how we did this, or would be happy to talk to you about helping you with such a project. So keep the green economy in mind for your region is the bottom line here. Integrate green with strategic planning. It's a crucial piece. We're seeing some changes, trends, as Randall has pointed out, and as Mike has pointed out, and those will be trends of the future. And it's going to affect your industries as well as your workforce. The green economy is growing, and certainly the federal spending has accelerated that. So consider how you in your region can capitalize on this favorable market. And then bottom line, use data to inform your strategies. Having data, the benchmarks, knowing what the growth rates may be is also very important as you consider strategies going forward, and consider supply chain to help your region bring in other firms, as well as think about the housing impacts. Do you have the housing to help your region grow? So with that, we have maybe 7 minutes for questions. I'm going to toss this back to Andrew to see if there are
Chris.
any.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody in the chat have a question? I didn't see any come through at this point. We could talk about specific industries, specific occupations, which would be most likely to move. There's a question from Lindsay. Randall or Mike, do we have any trends in current occupations, or which green energy jobs or occupations are trending most likely to move to smaller communities?
I'd have to look at some specifics to get an actual number there, but a lot of things that we're seeing moving into a lot of the rural communities are these large manufacturing hubs. So a lot of occupations are around there. And that's also, it could be a strain on some of these rural communities because of some of the housing and other factors that Chris mentioned. But that's one thing, at least, that we're seeing on our end.
Yeah, and I just briefly add, I don't have the data to back this up, but I would guess that both wind and solar related occupations would be growing in rural areas in particular, because that is often where you have the ability to build large generation plants of either type of energy.
Yeah. Randall, any trending anecdotes on hydrogen?
Yeah, same thing. I don't really have any data to back this up. I would go look where the new hydrogen hubs are. The federal government has selected some places, including Houston for sure, and I think there are 3 or 4 others with billions of dollars of support collectively. So that would be my one point there. But you guys would have better data than I would, I suspect, on actual job counts.
Yeah. So that's also included in our data set for, I think if I'm not mistaken, hydrogen isn't split out specifically yet, but it does fall under an other electricity generation category. But yeah, we also see that's a big thing from the hydrogen hubs coming through from the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, which is, starting to get up to speed now. And, within the next few years here, we should be seeing some impacts to communities from that.
Here's an interesting one. Implications for green construction. I read recently that Gen Z is picking up the trades as the boomer generation begins to retire and vacate those positions. Do we have any insights on training needed for green energy construction or awards information, perhaps?
Well, go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to say we did some work for one regional area, and HVAC is a big one in terms of training needed there. I'm trying to think off the top of my head any other occupations that came up. Randall, did you have some?
Yeah, not specific occupations, but the general insight that there, as I mentioned, there's going to be an extraordinary need for construction jobs. And many of those jobs are not going to be different than non-green construction jobs. HVAC installation's been around for a long time. Heat pump's not that different than other HVAC items. But the need to construct and install transmission lines and distribution lines, there have been linemen for a long time. We're going to need a lot more of them. Building retrofits in general, installing insulation, installing new windows, all that is going to grow as the incentives for green infrastructure continue to flow through the economy. And so there are efforts underway by groups like Rewiring America and a variety of community college related programs that are trying to figure out how to train people in higher numbers and faster.
Cool. Yeah, great question indeed. We've got a few more in here. One specific use case. Let's real quick get to Christina. ESG being green economy driver for small rural areas.
I guess I kind of want to know a little bit more about that question. I'm not sure if Christina will have time to say it. I don't think ESG per se, but I do believe that the green transition will be. Again, all of a sudden being super sunny or super windy and having lots of land is no longer a downside for many communities. It's an upside. And so it opens up for brand new opportunities in industries well beyond just agriculture. So I think that is true. So the energy transition clearly will create opportunities for rural areas that did not exist before.
Great. And then lastly, thoughts on clean tech hubs, specifically in Metro Denver. It's currently the fourth MSA in the nation. Read that it ranks fourth in the nation. How might they capitalize? Quick tips for our friends in Metro Denver.
I'll just say, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this is exactly what's that person is getting at in the green energy hubs, but for example, here in Virginia, Dominion Power, my understanding is, has an electricity can provide a manufacturer with only green transmission, so that comes from green energy like solar. Of course, it costs more than the general price, but electric companies are starting to accommodate manufacturers or data centers, for example, who want to make sure that their electricity is being driven by green energy.
All right. Chris, Randall, we'll turn it over to you for final closing thoughts.
Well, thank you, Randall. Thank you, Mike. And please let us know of other ideas that you have for webinars. With that, Randall, I'll let you close it out.
Great. Well, just thanks to you all and Team Chmura for the opportunity to present, and thanks to the 90 of you who are still with us. A lot of data and information out there that was shared today. I would encourage you to take a look at those links, and I'm sure I can speak for the Chmura team, but if you all have questions of anybody who was on the presenting side, please feel free to reach out. And again, just thanks for being with us today.
Yep.
Thank you.
Further questions can be directed at www.chmura.com/contact us. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy your afternoons. Thanks, Randall. Thanks, Chris. Mike, we appreciate you all.